Bearing in mind, this is the last Shiur before Chag Shavuos. Goes without saying, it's only natural that we deal with Inyona D'Yoyma. So the topic we will be discussing tonight is an interesting halacha that we find in Mogen Avram, Siman Tov Tzadik Daled in Shulchan Aruch. And that is a meaning, I think, which in all Kehilas Ashkenaz, some Sephardim have the same meaning, but definitely all the Ashkenazim, that on Leil Shavuos, we don't daven Maariv till Tzeis HaKoichovim. And the Mogen Avram, in the beginning of Tov Tzadik Daled, writes, Ein mekadshen al hakois, you don't say Kiddush till Tzeis HaKoichovim, mishum Tmimois. Sheva Shabosois Tmimois Tihiyeno. So the Mogen Avram seems to say, if you're going to make Kiddush before nightfall, that means you are taking away part of the Tmimois, and that is why you need to wait with Kiddush. Ad Tzeis HaKoichovim. The Torah Zav says it's not only about Kiddush. You shouldn't daven Maariv till Tzeis HaKoichovim. The source, Mogen Avram quotes the Shlo. The Shlo brings a Brocha, and that is the father of the Shlo, and also Mases Binyamin. So three most important sources: the Shlo, his father, the Mases Binyamin, and they speak about Kiddush, and they specifically say the problem is not davening. The problem is only Kiddush. So it's a Kiddush that the Torah Zav says you shouldn't daven before Tzeis HaKoichovim, and it is not only Kiddush. And the Shlo quotes his Rebbe, Maharash Meloblin, Ish mepi ish ad Rabbi Yankiv Polak. So Rabbi Yankiv Polak is considered the father of Shittas HaChilukim, the father of Shittas HaPilpul. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I said a Shiur, and the Shiur was in Ivrit, like most of my Shiurim, about the development of Darkei Halimud BiYisrael. And we had a very interesting discussion about Derech HaPshat and Derech HaLamdis, and I spoke a bit about the personality of Rabbi Yankiv Polak, who was in Poland, in Lublin, in Krakow, and he is considered the father of Toras HaPilpul. So this Kiddush goes back to Rabbi Yankiv Polak. One should not make Kiddush before nightfall, before Tzeis HaKoichovim, because he is diminishing the concept of Tmimois. And that is somewhat of a pelagodl. How could a person change day to night or night to day? And if it's Sheva Shabosois Tmimois Tihiyeno, does it depend on every individual? And what's the problem about making Kiddush before nightfall? I mean, Rav Tzolishal Shabbos B'Yerev Shabbos. It's a Gemara, Brochas Daf Chavav, and you could make an early Shabbos. So why can't you make an early Shavuos? And if you make an early Shavuos, that would be taking off from Tmimois, which seems to be a huge Kiddush. And what is the difference between Kiddush and Arvis? After all, by Maariv you say Mekadosh Yisrael v'Hazmanim, and you say B'Yoyim Chag HaShavuos, says that. So why do all the other sources say that the Kpeda is only about Kiddush, not about davening, and the Taz says no, the Kpeda will be about davening as well? How do we define Tmimois? It is very well known, and I think I actually spoke about this 3 weeks ago, but I don't recall. I can no longer recall exactly what I say, where, and when. I remember what I talk about, but I give so many shiurim. But I think we discussed this in one of our previous shiurim, and definitely in previous years. There are two different approaches. How do we interpret or define Sheva Shabosois Tmimois Tihiyeno? So everybody knows about the opinion, the Shit of the Bahag, quoted in Sif Ches and Siman Tov Peites. The Bahag, Haruchas Gedolos, maintains that if you skipped one night, you're out. You can no longer be Makayim the Mitzvah. Because according to the Haruchas Gedolos, Tmimois means a full count of 49 days. And if you skip one day, you don't have a full count. So the shit of the halachas gedolos is Tmimois means 49 days, not one less. The Rosh, at the end of Masechet Psuchim, says that it is preferable to count Sfira at the beginning of the night and even before nightfall because of Tmimois. So the opinion of the Rosh is Tmimois refers not to the totality of 49 days, but to every day. Every day needs to be a full count, and that is why you need to count at the beginning of the night. And according to many Rishonim, you cannot count by day. And one of the reasons that you cannot count by day, only by night, is because of Tmimois. Because a full day, according to Halacha, is Laila, Yom, Hoilach, Achar, HaLailo. A full day starts from Tzeisik Rechovim till Tzeisik Rechovim, Me'erev ad Erev. So either Tmimois refers to each and every day into itself, or to the totality of 49 days. But this seems to be a third interpretation of Tmimois. And Tmimois means 49 days, and 49 days culminate at Tzeisek Rechovim of night 50. Because if Tmimois refers to every day, well, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, you could count the Bein HaShmoshes every night, even Lechatchila. And we spoke about this because according to Shulchan Aruch, you could count Bein HaShmoshes. So Bein HaShmoshes would be considered Tmimois. And B'Shas Adchak, you can even count Meplaga Mincha. And why don't we say, if you count Meplaga Mincha, then you're diminishing the Tmimois of the previous day, because you're counting a new day. So how would we understand this new Chiddush that you need to wait B'Chag HaShavuos for Tzeisek Rechovim, because otherwise you are diminishing Tmimois? And another general comment that I have, if this is a new halacha, how come it was born 500 years ago? So every generation deals with same sugyas, and there are always nuances and chidushim and sveikis, but a fundamental halacha, as a halacha of this nature, you cannot make an early Chag HaShavuos, because that would be diminishing Tmimois. That must be either in Chazal or in the Rishonim, and not 400 or 500 years ago, Begedolei Ashkenaz. And it is not really brought till the Magen Avraham and the Taz, neither in the Ramah nor in any other major posik till some 350 years ago. So as I explained, the early sources all talk about Kiddush. The Taz says the same rule would apply to Tefillah. What would be the difference between Kiddush and Tefillah? After all, in Arvis Shel Yom Tov, we say Yom Chag HaShavuos Hazeh, and we say Mekadosh Yisrael v'Hazmanim. That would be Tosefes Yom Tov. So why is it only about Kiddush? We do find in a few other sources in Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim that if you make an early Maariv, it is considered as if it is already the next day. Because otherwise, why did you daven Maariv? In Hilchas Nidus and Makuf Tzadik Vav Sif Aleph, we learn after the tzibur daven the Maariv, even if they make an early Maariv, a woman could no longer make a hefsek tahara regarding Shiva Nekiyim, and she needs to wait another day. And the Shach Sif Koten Daled there, Sif Koten Sif Kuf Tzadik Vav, the Shach says, and if the woman daven Maariv, everybody would agree she could no longer make a hefsek tahara, because if she daven Maariv, it is already tomorrow, even though she davened an early Maariv. It's after Plag HaMincha. So this is one source that after you daven Maariv, in a way, it is tomorrow. It is no longer today. It is as if it's already night. We find the same halacha in Hilchas Avelis. If a person daven Maariv and then a close family member passed away, regarding Shiva and Shloshim, you start counting from tomorrow, not from the day, even though it's still before Shkia, and definitely before Tzeisek Rechovim. Because if you daven Maariv regarding you and your halachas, it is already considered tomorrow. And the third source is in Siman Tov Reish Samach Ches, when a person makes Kiddush in Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is the 8th day of Sukkot. But Shmini Atzeres, we no longer sit in the Sukkah. Chazal say Shmini Chag Bifnei Atzmaihu. And there's a machlokes between the Marshal and the Taz. If you make an early Shmini Atzeres, do you need to eat in the Sukkah? It's before it says HaKoichavim. And the Taz says no, because to you it's Shmini Atzeres. You no longer have the mitzvah of Sukkah. The Marshal says, but this is a Dioraisa. And you cannot turn Sukkahs into Shmini Atzeres. It's before nightfall. So in these three sources, we do find that after Maariv, regarding certain halachas, you definitely, if you make an early Maariv and you said Avdullah, you can't do a malacha on Shabbos, that goes without saying. But regarding various halachas, primarily the Rabbanans, we say after Maariv, it is already another day. So why, according to all the other poskim, the Emek Brocha, the Shlo, Masas Ben Yomen, Rabbi Yankev Porak, Marash Merablin, it's only about Kiddush and not about Tfilas Arvis. The Magen Avraham says Arvis as well. No, the Magen Avraham says only Kiddush. The Taz says Arvis as well. And now I have a kasha, the Magen Avraham contradicts his own ruling in Siman Reish Ayin Aleph. So we started the shiur with Siman Tov Tzadik Daled. That's the dinam of Erev Shavuos. And Shavuos, the Magen Avraham says, you cannot make Kiddush before nightfall, before it says Hakechavim. But Arvis, Tfilas Maariv wouldn't be a problem. In Reish Ayin Aleph, the Magen Avraham says, when a person daven in shul and he comes home, he's only chayiv in Kiddush midrabbanon, because Minatori was Yotze Kiddush in davening when he says Mekadesh HaShabbos. So the Magen Avraham himself says that Arvis is actually Kiddush. And when you come home, you only have a mitzvah Rabbanon Lakadosh Al Yayin, because the mitzvah Dioraisa, Zochar Yom Shabbos Lakadosh, you were already Mekayim in davening. So according to the Magen Avraham, why wouldn't there be a problem davening before Tzeis HaKechavim? Because davening is Kiddush. And if he says you can't make Kiddush before Tzeis HaKechavim, how could you daven before Tzeis HaKechavim? Magen Avraham Shitosai, that you're actually Yotze Kiddush Min HaTorah by davening. So all these questions bring me to a conclusion. We're not dealing with a halachic concept, but rather with a minhag. And that is why it's not a pella. So if this is a halacha, why isn't it in the Rambam, the Tur, or the Bali Atoisus, the Noise Kelim of the Rambam, the Noise Kelim of the Tur? Why is it not found anywhere till Reb Yankev Polak? It is not a halachic ruling, it is more of a minhag. And that is a minhag. Minhagim could be established at later generations as well. And it definitely is a minhag vasikim. So the sources that I quoted, both the father of the Shu, both the Shlu and the Masas Ben Yomen, all have a question. Minhag Ashkenaz. It is not so common today, but in days of yore, that was an or Kehilas Ashkenaz, and even today, more in Chutz La'aretz than in Eretz Yisrael. I was last week in America, Shabbos, I davened with an Ashkenazi minyan, and the Shliach Tzibah makes Kiddush, Leil Shabbos, in shul and in the morning. And little children drink the grape juice or the wine. But they make Kiddush bebeis HaKnesses. And this minhag is brought in the Rosh, Beresh Perek Ave Psachim. So the poskim that I mentioned at the beginning of today's shiur say, the Kpeda is only Kiddush when you make at home. But the Kiddush in shul is not a problem. If they davened an early davening, then the Kiddush they make in shul was also after Plug, before Tzeis HaKechavim. Why would that not be a problem? So they say, Kiddush in shul is not a problem, because it's not the real Kiddush. It is just a minhag, because in days of yore there were many guests that didn't have where to eat, and they slept in shul, so we make kiddush for them. But it's not the real kiddush. And in the Lashon of the Shlo and the other sources, Einoi nera kemikadish, and it doesn't seem like he is diminishing Tmimois. So the Lashon of the Shlo and the others is Einoi nera kememayit Tmimois. And what I learned from this Lashon is it's all about how does it seem to be, how does it look. But by halakhic definition, you can't reduce Tmimois. You cannot diminish Tmimois. Tmimois is Tmimois. And there is no real kpeda al pi halacha, neither davening early, not even making kiddush early. It's more of a minhag mepnei shenira'ah kemi shememayet tmimois, because if it's already Shavuos, then it's no longer Sfiras or Omer. It cannot be Omer and Shavuos. And therefore, it's not really a halachic definition, but rather a minhag mepnei shenira'ah. It is like many other minhagim that are about how it looks, how it seems to be. Sefer HaRoikeach, Pesach Simen Reish Tzadik Dalet. Sefer HaRoikeach writes, we count 49 days. The 50th day, there is no need to count because we say Kiddush and Tefillah. What does he mean? What he means is, the Torah says, Tisperu Chamishim Yom. And the halacha is only 49 days. So there is an inherent stira minei ubei. Sheva Shabbosos Tamimois Tihiyeno. How many days are 7 weeks? You don't need to be a mathematician to know that 7 times 7 is 49. Sheva Shabbosos Tamimois Tihiyeno. Ad memochas HaShabbos Tisperu Chamishim Yom. So how many days do we count? 49 or 50? So obviously, the Rakeach comes to reconcile what this apparent stira seems to be. And he says, we actually count 50 days, but the method of counting day number 50 is by Kiddush. Chag HaShavuos is there. Yom Matan Teroseinu. And that is the count of day number 50. So another comment I want to make. I think this halacha is not about diminishing the 50 days of Svira. That's not the issue. Tamimois refers either to each and every day or to the final count of 49 days, and that is the shit of halachas gedolos. The problem with making Kiddush before Tzeis HaKechovim is not a problem of Sfiras Omer, it's a problem of Atzeres. Because Tisperu Chamishim Yom, and only then is it Atzeres. Shavuos is different than Pesach and Sukkot. Pesach and Sukkot depends on a date. And the Torah clearly says, Chamisha Osar, 15 days in Tishrei, 15 days in Nisan, that is Pesach and Shavuos. In Shavuos, we do not find a date. It is Chamishim Yom. So Shavuos comes after Chamishim Yom. And that is why you can't make Kiddush until Chamishim Yom is over. So the problem with making an early Kiddush is not cutting Sfiras Omer short, but it is like making Shavuos too early. Because Shavuos needs to come after Chamishim Yom. And like the Rakeach says, when you make Kiddush, that is counting day number 50. There's a fascinating Maharil. And this is quite an interesting story. A bit amusing as well. So the Maharil, and the Maharil is the father of Minhagei Ashkenaz. And in Sfiras Omer, the Maariv writes, B'yoyim memtes, tisha v'arboam yoyim, a person counts, ha-yoyim, tisha v'arboam yoyim, shehem shiva shavuos la'omer, v'mocher erev chag ha-shavuos. Choik Yankov in Simentov Peites. Simentov Peites are all the Dinam Asvias Woimer, and the Choik Yankov writes, according to the Maariv, that is the Nusach HaSfira. And day 49 you say, Hayom Arbo, Tishav Arboam Yoim, Shehem Shiva Shvias La'omer, U'mochar Yoim Erev Chag HaShavuos. That is the way we count. And the Prima Godim says, strange, we never heard anybody do that. And why doesn't the Ramah quote the Maariv? He quotes the Maariv constantly. And we never heard this. We never saw this. That's the comment of the Prima Godim. Comes along the Shalit Tshuva, and he says, it's a joke. It's a mistake. The Maariv writes, day 49, you count, Hayom Tisha B'Oim Yoim Shem Shiv Shvius La'omer. And then the Maariv writes, V'mocher Erev Shavuos. And therefore he starts teaching the halachas of Shavuos. When he writes V'mocher Erev Shavuos, he just says, okay, we finished with Siyas Woim, and now let's talk about Shavuos. Because tomorrow was Erev Shavuos. That's what the Shuvah says. In reality, somebody turned to the Choik Yankov and said, Rabbeinu, what you wrote on the Shulchan Aruch Choik Yankov, isn't that a mistake? Maybe Shatan the Maariv is V'mocher Erev Shavuos. So the Choik Yankov is the Shavuos Yankov. He was the Yankov Reisha, one of the greatest Gedolim more than 350 years ago. And he wrote many Sforim. Choik Yankov and Hilchos Pesach, Shar Shavuos Yankov, Minchas Yankov and Isa V'Heter. He has an amazing parish on the Agadatas of Ein Yankov. So in Shavuos Yankov, Chelik Gimel Simenun Beis, somebody turns to the Shavuos Yankov and he says, is this a mistake? And he insists, no, it's not a mistake. That is the Nusach HaSvura, Svira, according to the Maariv. Oimed al Da'atoi. So how do we understand this? Unless we say that, yes, 49 days culminate in Shavuos, and Shavuos is day number 50. And that is why the Torah says, Tisperu Chamishim Yoim. So the Rokeach would be similar to the Maariv, but the Maariv goes to an exaggerated argument that we need to mention that in the Nusach HaSfira. So on night 49, we count 50. When we say, Mochar, Erev Chag HaShavuos. And that is the way we count day number 50. And therefore, my feeling is, making an early Shavuos would not be the problem of cutting short Sfiras Oima. It would be, it's not yet time for Chag HaShavuos. I want to quote the Gemara in Chagigah Daf Yud Zayin. Menei shonim v'kadesh yoivles, menei yomim v'kadesh atzeres. Menei yomim v'kadesh atzeres. Now, unlike Kiddush HaChodesh, which needs a declaration of Beis Din, and they say Mekudash, Mekudash, it is a ceremony. Unlike Ibur Hashona, which is a ceremony. Unlike Kiddush HaYovel, which is a ceremony by the Beis Din, Atzeres demands no Kiddush. Atzeres is just like Shabbos, just like Yom Tov. It comes. It just comes. And every individual davens and he makes Kiddush. But it's not something upon the Beis Din. But nevertheless, the Lashon of the Gemara is Minei Yomim V'Kadesh Atzeres. So maybe the argument not to make an early Kiddush, Leil Shavuos, is not a problem with the Sfira. It is a problem with Chag HaAtzeres. Because Chag HaAtzeres comes when you finish the count of 49 days. And therefore you need to wait till a totality of 49 days and say Sikha, and only then is it time to be Mekadesh Atzeres. So fundamentally, what I just shared with you are two different ideas. One is this a problem in Sfias Roim or is it a problem in Chag HaAtzeres? But the more important yesod is, this is not really a halachic concept, but rather a minag mepnei shener'ah. It seems, it looks like the 49 days aren't over yet. So it's too early to be Makadesh Atzeres because Chazal say Menei Yomim, and only then Kadesh Atzeres. So we're dealing with a minhag. It's interesting that the Netziv, in three different sources and three of his amazing Sforim, the Netziv was the yeshiva of Volozhin, an anikel of the founder of the yeshiva, Reb Chaim of Volozhin, and he wrote amazing Sforim. Hamek Dover an Chamish Chumash Torah, Hamek Shaila an She'iltos de Reb Achai Goen, and a Shalosh Tshuvos, Meishav Domer. Hamek Dover, Parshas Emor, She'iltos Kuf Samach Zayin, Meishav Dover, Chelak Aleph Simen Yud Ches. So, I like to share some biographical details whenever we quote Sforim that not everybody is familiar with. She'iltos de Rav Achai Goen. There's a machlokes, the Rashbam and Rabbeinu Tam, who was Rav Achai Goen. The Rashbam, twice in Shas, the Rashbam says that the Bala She'iltos is Rav Achai that appears in the Gemara. And he was an Amoira. According to the Rashbam, the She'iltos is actually Chazal, and it has extreme significance and importance. Tosfos says no. The She'iltos was one of the Gaonim. He was in the Tkufa of Gaonim. Ben Kach or Ben Kach, it's an important source. So the She'iltos is a summary of most of the halachas and mitzvahs HaTorah, the halachas lefi Parshas HaShavua. The Meiri, in his introduction to Shas, to his beautiful Sefer, shares an interesting story how the She'iltos came to be. And he writes that the Baal HaShe'iltos, who was one of the Gaonim, had a son who wasn't a big masmid, and his dad had a problem just getting him to sit down and learn. So he made a compilation of all the important halachas, and he was mesader these halachas in accordance to Parshas HaShavua. So Shabbos he used to learn with his son. All week, the boy was too busy. I don't know what he was busy with. Maybe he was out there making money. So Shabbos, father and son learned together, and that is how we got this amazing Chibur She'iltos de Rav Achai Goen. And the Netziv wrote a beautiful commentary to the She'iltos, and that is one of the three sources that I quote the Netziv. A few moments ago, I spoke about the Chok Yankov and the Shavuos Yankov, and I mentioned that I wrote many Sforim. Primarily, the most three important Sforim are Chok Yankov and Hilchos Pesach, Minchas Yankov and Issa V'Heter, and Shavuos Yankov. He also has a sefer, Iyun Yankov and the Ein Yankov. What brought him to make a perish on the Agadat? I don't know whether everybody knows the sefer Ein Yankov. Ein Yankov is a compilation of all the Agadatas in the entire Shas. In days of yore, when people worked hard, most shuls in Europe had more Ein Yankovs than Shasim. Not every shul had a Shas, but every shul had an Ein Yankov. And usually between Mincha and Maariv, people used to get together and learn Ein Yankov. For Amei Oretz, it was hard to learn Shas. They didn't have Schottenstein, they didn't have Mesifta, they didn't have a zillion Daf Yomi Shurim on the internet. They didn't have so much material that we have. And people worked very hard. Minig balabatem chashuvim depoi is not to work. So you have time to learn. So in Europe, every shul had many Ein Yankovs. Recently, I wanted to look something up in the Shavuos Yankov's Perish and Ein Yankov. And I asked the Gabbai of my shul, could the priest bring an Ein Yankov? And he said, we have 11 shuls in the Shechuna. I didn't find an Ein Yankov in any of them. People don't know what it is. I told them, you go out right now and buy an Ein Yankov for our shul. So the Shul's Yankov writes a Perish on Ein Yankov. Why did he do that? In his introduction, he writes, he developed a very rare and terrible illness of his eyes, and he was losing his eyesight. And the doctors weren't sure whether they could save his eyesight. And they suggested a certain tipul, a certain remedy that might destroy his entire eyesight immediately. So he decided to write a perish on the Ein Yankov. Ein Yankov is an eye. So that is why he wrote a perish on the Ein Yankov. It should be a zgula, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should cure his illness and restore his eyesight, and his prayers were fulfilled, and that is how we were zeicher to his perish on the Ein Yankov, which is an amazing story. So the Netziv, in the three sources I mentioned, has a totally new approach to this minhag. And he writes, in Shavuos, the Torah says, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. And when the Torah says, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh, it is only what is actually Etzem hayoim, and there's no Tosefes Yom Tov, because the Torah writes, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. And that is why you can't make an early Shavuos. You can't make Shavuos before it's really here. And that's why you need to wait for Tzeis HaKoichav, and you can't make an early Shavuos because the Torah says, Etzem hayoim hazeh. Both according to my interpretation and according to the Netziv, we could understand why the Ikak paid as Kiddush and not Tefillah. The essence of Kiddush is Kiddush Hayoim. It is Kiddush Hayoim. The essence of Tefillah is Tefillah's Arvis. In weekdays we have one Nusach, Shabbos one other, Yom Tov one other, but Tefillah is Tefillah. And even in accordance to the Magen Avraham, that you're Yotzei Kiddush with Tefillah, but Kiddush still, Tefillah still isn't Kiddush. And because it's all about Ner'ah, and it's a minig and not a halacha, the minig refers only to Kiddush. Because Kiddush is Kiddush Hayoim. And when Chazal say, Minei Yomim Vekadesh Atzeres, that would primarily be the act of Kiddush, Shabbos, or Yom Tov is Kiddush. Kiddush Hayoim B'Dvorim. That is the essence of the mitzvah, and not Tefillah. What's strange about the Netziv, what's the point in explaining a minig in a different way that the Baalei minig presented? If this would be a Gemara, there could be different interpretations in this halacha. But the only source of this minig is the Yankov Polak, Marash Melublin, the Shlo. They are the ones that brought this minig, and they are the ones that explain the minig. So what is the point in explaining this minig in a different fashion? But maybe there is a point. Anyway, that's the Netziv. So originally, I thought this Netziv is the Taimeh Gedolah. The Rambam maintains there is no mitzvah of Tosefes Shabbos and Yom Tov. But everybody agrees there is a mitzvah of Tosefes Yom Kippurim, and that's a Gemara Meforeshes in Yom Pei Aleph. And in Yom Kippurim, the Torah says, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. And everybody agrees there is Tosefes Yom Kippurim, even though the Torah says Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. So why does the Netziv argue that by Shavuos steht Be'etzem hayoim hazeh, and that's why there could be no Tosefes? But when I revisited the Gemara, I realized it's not a kasha on the Netziv, but rather a raya to the Netziv. So the Gemara says there is a concept of Tosefes Yom Kippurim, but there is no chorus b'Tosefes. Neither if a person eats, neither if he does a malacha. Why is there no chorus? Because the Pasuk says, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. So yes, so the Gemara says, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh excludes Tosefes. So there are 3 times by Yom Kippurim, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh, excluding 3 different halachas from Tosefes Yom Kippurim. But there still is the mitzvah say of Ta'anu es nafshoy seichem. Because by the mitzvah say, the Torah does not say, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh. So this Gemara doesn't disprove the Netziv. Actually, it's a raya to the Netziv's point. Yes, Be'etzem hayoim hazeh excludes Tosefes. And that is the new interpretation of the Netziv. Many years ago, I think it was about almost 20 years ago, I got a question from St. Petersburg. And that is in Russia, and it's up north. Tzeisa Kechovim, Shavuos will be 11:30 by night. So you can't make Kiddush 11:30 by night, and Shavuos, all your kids will be asleep. And the person that turned to me is a Kiddush activist. And they usually, every Yom Tov by night, they have a huge come together, hundreds of people. Everybody says, if we're going to make it 11:30 by night, no one is going to come. So could we make Kiddush earlier? And I reasoned, this is a real Shas Dechak. And if it's only a minag, definitely it's not Ma'akev B'di'evet. More than that, not everybody agrees to this minhag. 3 important sources don't agree, and it is interesting because almost all the sources, definitely the early sources to this minhag, are Ashkenazim, not Sfaradim. Rabbi Yankov Polak, Marash Meroblin, the Shloh's father, Masas Ben Yom, they were all Ashkenazi Gedolim. Minhoge Varamayza, and that is one of the most important svarim regarding Minhoge Ashkenaz, Minhoge V'Maize. He writes, some have a minig not to make Kiddush before Tzeisa Kechovim. I haven't seen this minig berabonan kshishoy. And that is also in Minhoge Ashkenaz Yosef Oimetz. So these are 2 sources, very important sources about Minhoge Ashkenaz, and they both say, that's not our minig. Maybe I am confusing which of these 2 svarim says, he brings the shlo, I think it's the Yosef Oimetz. He brings the shlo. He brings the shlo's father. But he says, it was not the minig in our kehillas. And those are Minhoge Ashkenaz. Rabbi Yankov Emden, and that's fast forward 200 years. Rabbi Yankov Emden writes, in some kehillas they have this minig to wait for Tzeis HaKechavim. And it's a dikduk cholush. It's a very shvacha svara. You're diminishing tmimois. Rabbi Yankov says, it's a very shvacha svara. And I say, kol azores nizkar. And it is better to make an early Shavuos, and I totally disagree with this minig, it's a mistake. So Rabbi Yankov Emden was more than 200 years after Rabbi Yankov Polak. But anybody that's familiar with Rabbi Yankov Emden wouldn't wonder. Rabbi Yankov Emden was a big takef, and lo et pa'el ma'af achad. There's a strange tshuva in the tshuvas of Rabbi Yankov Emden, Shilas Yavetz Chelik Beisim and Chof. Shamati ma'ovi moiri, and the father of Rabbi Yankov Emden was the Chacham Tzvi, Sheshama mibal Chelkas Mechoykek. Chelkas Mechoykek is one of the 2 noise kelim of Shulchan Aruch Even Ezer. She'ein ra'ui lahoirois hairoa, ela mi she'yachol lakor v'limchoik seif min ha'Shulchan Aruch. You can't be a real posek and a moira unless you could remove a sui from the Shulchan Aruch. I don't want to try to translate the lakor Velimchoik seif min hashulchan aruch, too harsh. But that's a strange criteria. When you want to give heter haruah to a person that learned Yoredeyan or Achayim, you need to check, could you tear a halacha out of the Shulchan Aruch? If you can't, then you can't be a posek. Strange criteria. And Rabbi Yankov Emden Ba'anovi Yasera writes, V'ani lo nohagti ken elo eze pa'amim. Very nice. Very humble. He writes, I really didn't do it, only a few times. But that's Rabbi Yankov Emden. That was his personality, so it's no wonder he comes out very strongly against this minhag. And he says, why wait till the middle of the night before Simchas Yom Tov? There's no difference between Shavuos and any other Shabbos. You can make an early Yom Tov, you can make an early Shabbos. And he totally disagrees with this minhag. Halacha ke Mogen Avraham, halacha ke Taz, ve'ein halacha ke Rabbi Yankov Emden. However, when we're dealing with an extreme Shas Tchak, and if you're going to wait for Tzeisek Yechovim, nobody's going to be there. And we want to be Makar of Eden. That's why we're here. And therefore, B'Shas HaTchag, Vaday sheyesh lahokal, because this halacha has no source in the Rishonim, neither in the three pillars of halacha. The Rambam, the two of the Shulchan Aruch, they don't bring it. It is only later Achronim, and it is only a minhag, and not everybody agrees with this minhag. So b'shas hatchak, we definitely could be maker. The same question was asked in another shas hatchak, a far greater shas hatchak, and a painful one. My Rebbe, the Kloiser Mager Rebbe, in two different tshuvas in Divrei Yatzav or Chaim, tells the story of Leil Shavuos Tov Shin Daled. Many times I share a different story about my father, my late father, Zecher Tzadik Levrocha, and my late Rebbe. First time they met was the second day Shavuos Tov Shin Daled in Auschwitz. So the Kloiser Mager Rebbe tells, and he writes this in two of his tshuvas, 1944, Shavuos was Motzei Shabbos. And the notices were plastered all over town that Motzei Shabbos, everybody needs to be in the central square, and they're all going to be taken on a train to an unknown destination. They didn't know where they're going, but they needed Motzei Shabbos, Leil Shavuos, I think 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, everybody with his meager belongings be in the center of town. And the people asked the Kloiser Mager Rebbe, could we make an early davening? Because we won't be able to daven with minyan. Could we make an early Shavuos? At least daven and make Kiddush and maybe have at least something of a Sudas Yom Tov. Little did they know that that'll be the last time most of them will ever make Kiddush. Because between 80 and 90% of those that arrived in Auschwitz were taken immediately to the gas chambers and the crematoria. So the Kloiser Mager Rebbe said, in that Shas Tchak, of course, he paskened, yes, we should make an early Yom Tov. That was the ultimate Shas Tchak. More painful than any we could imagine. And the Shas Tchak in St. Petersburg I dealt with 25 years ago is somewhat a slightly more pleasant Shas Tchak than they had in 1944 when they asked the Kloiser Mager Rebbe their question. So we dealt with a concept that we all will share in less than a week, this coming Thursday night. So, this is an interesting topic, and I do not recall that we spoke about this in past years. So some divrei chizuk lekras Chag HaShavuos, and I forgot to mention at the beginning of this year that tonight's year is dedicated Le'ilui nishmosoi of Arav Elchanan Ephraim ben Avram. This yortzeit was Chav Gimel Iyar. He was a participant in this shiur, and we miss him. I remember him, and he used to come to our shiur. Is this his first yortzeit, or the second, which was the third yortzeit, or the fourth? So the Torah we learned tonight should be Le'ili Nishmosoi, She'anuach v'sholom al mishkavoi, and he should be a Melis Yosha for his beautiful family. So, because I forgot to mention his name at the beginning of the shiur, I will mention his name at the other shiurim I'm going to give this week, throughout the week, and I'm going to dedicate the shiurim Le'ilui Nishmosoi. So in just another few days, it's Chag Shavuos, and we are entering the Shloshis Yemei HaGabola. Sholosh Regalim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. Sukkot has two huge mitzvahs, mitzvah Sukkah and mitzvah Lulav. Pesach has many more. Many mitzvahs of Leila Seder, Matzah, Moreh, Sipi Yetzias Mitzrayim, Dalet Koises, Heseva, Isser Achilas Chometz, Bedikas Chometz, Bittel Chometz, many mitzvahs. Shavuos has no mitzvahs. It is only Yom Tov. But Shavuos has two important minhagim. And when there are no mitzvahs, the minhagim have even greater meaning and significance. What are the two minhagim of Shavuos? They seem to be two extremes. One minhag is Leil Shavuos, being up all night to learn. The other minhag is blinches. Some asymmetry. Doesn't seem to be symmetrical. One minhag is you learn all night, and the other one is blinches and cheesecake. So what is it about? Fascinating Gemara in Pesachim Samaches. Rabbi Yochanan says there's a stira between two psukim. Pesachim Samaches, Rabbi Yochanan says a stira between two psukim. Atzeres ti Elochem, Atzeres LaHashem. And there's a machlokes Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkonos and Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, two of the greatest Tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer says each individual could choose either Lashem or Lachem. You could decide, it's up to you. Do you want to daven and learn all day? Or do you want to eat and drink and have a good time? Is it about Simchas HaNefesh or Simchas HaGuf? Physical or spiritual? Anyone could decide. Rabbi Shua says, no, that's not reasonable. Chetzio Lashem v'chetzio Lachem. Learn and daven well, and you also have a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov, which is Basa v'yayin. And then the Gemara says something surprising. Hakol moedim ba'atzeres de be'ina beinam Elochem. Shavuos, even Rabbi Eliezer would agree. You can't learn and daven all day. You need to enjoy. My Tommy, why is Atzeres different? Yom Shaboy Nitna Torah. And that is counterintuitive. I'm sure that if they would ask any of us, which of the Sholosh Regalim are you entitled to learn all day? We will all say, which of the three? Probably Shavuos, Yom Kabbalas Torah. Why? Yom Shenitna Torah. But the Gemara uses that same reasoning, my Tama, Yom Shenitna Torah, to say no. Shavuos is the only Yom Tov in which even Rabbi Eliezer would agree you need to eat and drink. And why is that? Because of Rashi, laharois. We want to show, we want to prove, shenoyach v'mekubel olav yom zeh shabo nitna Torah liyisrael. We want to prove that we're happy this day. And how do you express joy? By eating and drinking and having a good time. Laharois. To whom do we want to show off? Rashi writes, Laharois, to show, to prove, Shenoyach v'makubel olav, Yom zeh shabo nitnu Torah liYisrael. And my feeling is, Laharois lemi, to our children, to the coming generation. There is a misconception to many that you need to learn Torah, and living the Torah way is what will bring you to Chayei Olam Haba. But it's hard, it's difficult, it's painful. And we want to say no. It's not only about Olam Haba, it's about Olam Hazeh. If you want to have a happy, rewarding, fulfilling life, learn Torah. Torah is happiness, Torah is joy. Torah is the greatest way to live. It is the happiest way to live. This is a story I told many times, about 30 years ago, or maybe even more. I met a person and he told me he was the first group that learned in Lakewood by the Baron Kotler. And there was a very small yeshiva. So in those days, the yeshiva knew the Talmidim. Today, a yeshiva can't possibly know these huge yeshivas today with 1,000, 2,000 bochum. How could a yeshiva know the bochum? I'm not even sure the yeshivas are interested today to know their Talmidim. They should be, because Chazal say, "V'limadet hamoisem es b'neichem, v'shinantum levnecho elu hatalmidim." Talmidim should be like family. But anyway, he learned in Lakewood, then he got married, he went into business, he was very successful, he became rich, and he happened to meet Rabban at an event, maybe it was a dinner or a chasan, and Rabban told him, I haven't seen you for years, you never come to yeshiva, you've never come to a shiur. And he says, the yeshiva remembers me, I wasn't the best boy, I wasn't the biggest masbid, and Baruch Hashem, I was very successful in business, and I'm working hard, and I support 5 yesachars. I have a yesachar zavolen arrangement with 5 Yungalite. Isn't that the right thing for me to do? And Rabban said, wow, I'm mekana your olam haba. But what's going to be with your olam haza, he said. Olam haba, you're guaranteed. You have 5 yesachar zavulans. Can't get any better than that. But how's your olam haza? If you never come to a shiur, don't enjoy your learning, what's going to be with your olam haza, he asked. Laharois shenoyach v'mekubel olav yom zeh shabo nitno Torah liYisrael. We want our children to understand it's about olam haza, not only about olam haba. I was in America last week, and I met a person approximately my age. We spent some time together, and he asked me casually, how many kids do you have? I said, I have 7 children. How many grandchildren do you have? And Mishum Eina Bisha, I don't want to share the number, a lot. And then I asked him, how many children do you have? And he says, I have 6 kids, 3 girls and 3 boys. How many grandchildren? And he says, none of my kids are married yet. And I was a bit taken aback. And he said, my daughter just got engaged, one of my daughters. I'm not very happy about the spouse she chose. I'm not sure the other 5 plan to get married. And he says, my dream is to have a grandchild. And this person is fabulously rich, but so sad. So sad. I mean, what is his life about? So, living the Torah way is not only about Olam Haba, it's about Olam Haza. Somebody made a remark. I doubt whether I should say this over, but I do decide anyway to say it over. And he made a remark. Even in Chas v'Sholem, after 120, or maybe even before 120, I would have reached the conclusion that everything was false. I will choose to live my life over the way I lived it. The Torah way. I raised a beautiful family. I had so much nachas. I enjoyed every Shabbos. Yom Tovim were fantastic. I enjoyed my davening. I felt so great with my learning. I would choose the same. So we all remember the Braisa of Perek Vav of Masechet Avos. Kachi darcha shel Torah. Pas b'melech toichel mayim b'msura tishtal oretz tishon v'chayit tzar tichya. Uve'Torah to'omel. V'mat oise ken. Ashrecha b'yonam hazeh v'toiv l'chol yonam haba. And this Mishnah somewhat turns us off. We don't want a life of pas b'melech and mayim b'msura and chayit tzar tichya. Is that what we need to aspire to? Rashi is the ultimate parshan, and Rashi says, we all hope to have a comfortable life. We don't need to be rich, but we all want to be comfortable, have bread on the table. Rashi says, even if you will be in dire straits, and even if the circumstances will be such, all you will have is pas b'melech v'mayim b'msura v'ala oretz tishon. Nevertheless, in b'Torah ato omer ashrecha b'yolam hazeh v'toiv l'chol yolam haba. It's not that we wish for each other pas b'melech v'mayim b'msura. No, we daven. And just this last Shabbos in Birchas HaChodesh, Chaim sheyesh b'Moshe v'chavod. It's legitimate. You could daven for Moshe v'chavod. What Chazal mean to say, even if all you will have is pas b'melech, still, in b'Torah ato omer, ashrecha b'yolam hazeh v'toiv l'cha l'olam haba. So Torah is not only about olam haba, it is about olam hazeh as well. The simcha of Talmud Torah, the simcha of understanding, ein simcha ka'toras asveikes, simchas mitzvah, the simchas veikes on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what we want to share with our children. That is what we want to aspire and inspire our children to follow in our footsteps. And that is why, yes, Hakal moedim ba'atzeres de be'inem be'lam Elochem. My tame, yoim shenitnu Torah. Laharois shenoyach v'mekubel olav yoim zeh shebo nitne Torah liyisrael. Yes, it's about cheesecake and blinches. Yeah, that's what Kabbalas Torah is about. Yeah, if you choose the Torah way, if you learn Torah, if you observe Torah, if this is what you choose, you're going to have a sweet life. Ashrecha b'yolam hazeh v'toiv l'cha la'olam haba. So there are two different minhagim. When do you eat your blinches? Our minhag is Shavuos in the morning. Come home from shul, you make kiddush, you have a melechig kiddush. In Ashkenaz, many kiddush have the Suda, the melechig Suda, Yom Tov by night. I think our minhag is more reasonable. You can't be mekabel Yom Kabbalas Torah with blinches. Doesn't work. Doesn't go that way. After you're all up, you're up all night and you learned, and you didn't speak Dvarim B'Telem all night, and you learned all night until Alois HaShach, until the nights, Bedin hu sheyitel schorei. Then you could have your blinches. But you can't start off Yom Kabbalas Torah with cheesecake. No, it doesn't work that way. So meaning number one is Leil Shavuos. Meaning number two is have your cheesecake. Laharois shenoyach v'mekubel olav yoim zeh shebo nitno Torah liyisrael. Yerotzen sheichkenu amoim. We should always be zeicham to enjoy Torah. And hundreds of times I quoted Rabbeinu Yoina. Avos perek beis mishne yud dalet ki sha'ato misyagaya b'Torah tishtashaya ba. How do we translate Shashua? Shashua is pleasure. Enjoy. Enjoy your journey. When you learn Torah, yagia sa Torah tishtashaya ba. And that is also a sgula to remember what you're learning. Kufyutet tetzayin in Tehillim, bechukoi secho eshtasha, lo eshkach dvorecha. So when we enjoy our learning, we will retain what we learn, we'll remember what we learn, and that is the minig. Dvash v'cholav tachas l'shoinech. We should be zeicha to enjoy Torah, to teach Torah, to inspire in Torah, and for many more wonderful years, we should be zeicha to share the Olam Hazeh endeavor of Simchas HaTorah. Should all have a beautiful Yom Tov, and we should be zeicha bekorov. Kodesh Baruch should give us Yomim Tovim, sheniske tzadikim yoishvim va'atroseyim berosheim v'nehenin meziv hashchina. Good Yom Tov.